change hands. My name is Paul Kyllo. I am with CLEAResult. I'm the program director of Southern California operations for CLEAResult. I'll tell you who in a second who CLEAResult is. But I've been involved in, kind of like Paul, energy efficiency for a long time too. Prior to CLEAResult, I've been there about just over 5 years. I was with Southern California Edison and was running their HVAC programs there. So I've been involved with the WCEC and a lot of these you people in the room here since too long to remember. Oh, I got this thing here. So who is CLEAResult? So CLEAResult is, I guess, technically the largest third-party implementer that's fully focused on energy efficiency and demand response. We're a nationwide company. We have about 2,700 employees. We run 900 programs across the country and in Canada, covering all sorts of markets, which you can see up there. In Southern California, we have a high percentage of the programs that we operate are HVAC-based programs, and that's for anybody who knows CLEAResult. They've grown through this 2,700 people through a lot of acquisitions, so we've acquired a lot of third-party implementers, all of whom were doing little bits and pieces of HVAC programs for the various utilities. So now it somehow is morphed into all under my portfolio. So I think we run pretty much all the Southern California utility HVAC programs, with the exception of about like one or two maybe. So what specifically are we doing? I guess you can say that the HVAC programs, the way we're operating them and the way utilities are today, there's kind of three buckets of what they're in. There's the equipment replacement programs, and those can kind of have two different approaches. Kind of the upstream, midstream approach that Paul talked about, where we incentivize distributors and others to sell equipment to their contractors. We have downstream programs that are providing rebates to just the downstream customers for replacing that equipment. We also have incentives that we operate that really focus on the installation, not so much equipment-based. So there's maybe equipment rebates for the equipment itself, but we're really looking at doing this market transformation type approach to incentivize contractors to do the job correctly, and that involves following various industry standards like the ACCA Standard 5 for quality installation, pulling permits and all that kind of stuff. So it's more of a kind of behavioral type thing as opposed to efficiency. And then there's the maintenance programs, which probably are the biggest bucket of money that we are managing today. And these are programs that are like really focusing on the kind of the built environment, maintaining that existing equipment today to optimize its efficiency such that you don't have to necessarily replace that, because you see with a lot of customers, obviously, HVAC is a big expense, and they may or may not want to have to replace that. So we can just keep what's out there operating it more efficiently over the long term, kind of benefits everybody. With those maintenance programs, there's also kind of like retrofit add-on type things in terms of demand control, ventilation, VFDs, other things that we can do to optimize kind of existing equipment without having to replace it. So I'm not used to this little controller. I just sit at my desk all day and I just hit up and down on the computer. I haven't got fancy on these types of things. So when I was asked to talk up here today, I was kind of what works and what doesn't work with the kind of existing utility programs that we have or that are being implemented. So here's what works from my perspective. The programs, as I showed on the last slide, they're kind of all-encompassing. They hit the product life cycle kind of everywhere it can be, from the equipment replacement, installation, and maintenance. So it allows the utilities to really focus on the entire life of that unit and providing incentives and interactions to, like I say, optimize efficiency over that whole lifetime. Because of the flexibility of the programs, it also allows customers and contractors to kind of jump in and out of the program where it makes sense to them. If they're a maintenance contractor, there's programs for the maintenance side of that. If they're doing replacement work, there's incentives for that. The customers are not focused just on the sole replacement of the box like in the old days. You go back 10, 15 years ago, it was really just about replacing the box, and that was the only incentive. And they get that incentive once every 20 or so years, but there was nothing kind of in between those interactions. Another good thing about the programs today, I mentioned on the last slide as well from the residential perspective, ACCA Standard 5 is out there. That kind of serves the baseline for installation. From the maintenance programs on the commercial side, ASHRAE Standard 180 has served the basis for those programs. Prior to probably the last 5 or 6 years maybe, there was every utility and every program implementer probably created their own set of standards and processes that they wanted to follow. There was no really true industry standard that everything was following, and therefore programs were kind of done differently. Contractors had to do things differently, different procedures out in the field. Evaluators that would come in to evaluate the program after the fact would have different, they would evaluate them differently, but they'd have different things to evaluate. So this kind of brings everything under one common approach. So it makes the operations a bit easier today. And I also think from the upstream, midstream / perspective, we've had good participation from distributors in California. I think for the most part, we have every major distributor in the state for rooftop packaged equipment participating. I think where it falls apart a little bit are kind of specialty type equipments and the different things that are not just the standard piece of equipment. So there's my full 4 bullets on what works. Now I got like 4 pages on what doesn't work. No, just kidding. 10 bullets maybe, which my staff, when I presented this to them the other day to kind of make sure I wasn't saying anything off base, they said, I think we need to find more positive things. And I said, well, I tried, but no. So what doesn't work? I think, even the fact that, as Paul mentioned in his presentation, there are statewide aspects to these programs. They're still not truly statewide. Each utility kind of has a nuance the way they go to market. So there may be differences in terms of the equipment that's involved in the program, the incentive amounts, kind of how they interact, how participants interact with the program. So that causes some level of issues. For example, prior to CLEAResult buying everybody, there used to be multiple implementers between San Diego's residential and commercial programs and Southern California Edison's commercial and residential programs. So you could have a contractor that's kind of in that South Orange County, North San Diego County, that would have 4 ways of dealing with these residential and commercial programs. Now, we bought most of those people, and we still have 4 ways of doing it because we haven't fully integrated, and the programs are still kind of standalone programs. So that just causes, the contractors and others some aggravation on how they have to deal with stuff. I think, this next bullet on lack of consistency, one of the problems that I think we've had historically in the state of California, which is the Commission is trying to address now with kind of the new approach of this rolling portfolio, is kind of the start and stop type stuff. We are effectively, what now, Paul? We're in the 2010-12 program cycle. Is that correct? So we've been going on like these 1-year extensions since like 2012. And so we never really know up until like December 31st maybe if we're going into next year. And then we have to wait 3 months to get the contracts from the utilities. So what that does for like in the upstream world for distributors, they need to make stocking decisions months in advance so they know what to have in their warehouse for the future. So if we don't know that we have a program going into the next year until like December, don't really have contracts until January, February, they've already made a lot of stocking decisions for the spring and maybe even into summer by that time. So we can't really impact the ability to influence those purchase decisions. Here's another big problem that we have too in the upstream world is that the utilities, and I think it's driven largely, I keep saying utilities, I don't blame Paul and all his colleagues on this because the Commission is behind a lot of this stuff, but the need to really know exactly where that piece of equipment is being installed today. They want to have complete, utility account numbers, customer addresses, contact names, and all this stuff. And if you're working at the upstream channels, whether it be at a manufacturer or distributor level, they're fairly removed from that decision or that information. So it makes it very difficult for them to collect that from the contractors who may or may not even have that information. Some contractors are buying equipment that they just want to have in their own shops for emergency replacements, or they may not want to give that information up for confidentiality issues. So the distributors may not be able to get that customer information, and that then we lose that sale, or the distributors don't want to participate because of that. Slightly different on the contractor perspective. It's not really necessarily an upstream approach, but we've had limited success in trying to get contractors participating in programs today. I think statewide, we're probably, I try to add it up in my head on the way up here, probably 200-ish contractors between all the utilities are participating in the maintenance programs, and we have like 20,000 some odd contractors in the state, so we're really only touching a fraction of the market in terms of those maintenance programs. So we have to do a better job of trying to make a program that's more accessible to a wider range of contractors. Code enforcement is also another big deal. I don't know if anybody is involved with the Western HVAC Performance Alliance, but there's a code compliance program. I was talking to Dave Diaz a little bit earlier on that. There seems to be a lot of discussion within that organization as to who's responsible for compliance, and it seems like the distributors are getting like the focus right now because there's been a lot of things about tracking equipment sales from distribution into to where it's installed by the customer. and putting the onus of tracking that compliance to the distributor, who is kind of like the customer information part of it. They're not really involved in that transaction, so it's not really the right person to be enforcing that. There's probably better ways to look at compliance and just focus on the distributor. And I put down the market cannibalization as well. What that really is speaking to is that there's a lot of different programs, and if you look at, say, like commercial buildings, we have third-party implementers that are going after all energy in a commercial building, so that's going to be HVAC, lighting, plug loads, and all that stuff. So there's rebates and approaches for that. We have programs like the ones that we operate are just HVAC focused, going in that same commercial building, trying to sell them on strategies to optimize their HVAC use. We have the third-party programs. We have core utility programs that have rebates for this type of stuff. So there's a lot of different programs and different approaches that are really hitting the same customers, and I think that causes a lot of confusion in the marketplace, and the customer doesn't know which is the best thing to do, and the utility account reps don't know necessarily what is the best program to put people into, and people like myself talk about the other programs because we're incentivized and we're paid to really focus on our programs. So I think it just creates confusion in the marketplace. There is also a lack of clarity around, in the case of upstream programs, as to who gets the rebates. I mean, the program people side, we pay the distributors for the equipment that's qualifying, and there's kind of like this, silent direction to pass that down to the customer or the contractor into the customer. But it's not necessarily a requirement, so maybe the distributor pockets that money for themselves. Maybe they reduce the price of the equipment to the contractor. Maybe the contractor pockets that difference for themselves. Maybe they put it down to the customer. So there's and nobody wants to tell the customer in the end, is there a rebate available or not, because they're not sure if they're going to see that rebate. So it creates a little market confusion out there as to who is actually benefiting from the rebate. And then finally, the last one is are the programs actually being, are they having an influence in the market? Are they really incentivizing the right actions out there? Again, I mentioned there's not a lot of contractors participating. We have good distribution, but there's all equipment being captured because of the system requirement to collect customer information. We're not really addressing all types of equipment. We're just really focused on RTU equipment. I was reading the other day, or last night actually, to put myself to sleep, a study that I recalled from a few years ago from Hardy, that they said I think 30% of only 30% of the distributors nationwide see any impact from these upstream type programs on their bottom line. So they're not really seeing that there's a full benefit to these programs from their perspective. So is that really, are we really trying to are we having an impact on actually putting efficient equipment into the marketplace? I also had a discussion internally with some colleagues of mine who called me out of the blue just like on Thursday or Friday, because they needed to make a case to their utility client on the East Coast that an upstream program was a better way to go than a downstream program. So they're asking me for any studies that I can point them to that would definitively say that it's a cheaper way to go to market. And we couldn't come up with anything, that there was any definitive statement that was like, these are a cheaper way to go. And I was thinking of all the evaluations that have been done over the past 10, 15 plus years of the running of these programs. And I think they all look at what are the efficiency, have we installed equipment, have we put efficient equipment in, has that been installed? But nothing has really looked at the kind of the overall program approach to upstream and compared it to different strategies to see is that a most efficient way to go to market. So those are my kind of what doesn't work. So I'll leave them at that. There's probably more, but I don't want to bore you. So that was I think my last slide, I believe. It was.